When I called this presentation, I gave this title, I didn't realize I was going to be sharing the stage ultimately with someone from Dragon's Den. So this isn't about how you finesse your pitch to Deborah later. And in fact, at the last conference, they had Stephen Bartlett there, and so the joke worked just as well then. But it was just very much I needed something punchy, and for some reason my mind drifted back to going to the cinema with my then quite young son and seeing that particular movie. But I am going to talk about the challenges of facing and implementing a data protection, data privacy program. So my background, I was 15 years a civil servant in the MOD, the last 8 of which I spent working in and around cybersecurity and data protection. And I used to speak quite regularly at these conferences with that hat on. 2016, I moved out of defense and into the private sector, and I've been ploughing sort of more the data protection and privacy furrow ever since. So it's good to come back occasionally and try and realize just how out of touch I am with the technical side of cyber. But hopefully I can just offer a slightly different perspective with that DPO hat on. So I've called myself on the title slide, DPO at the National Lottery. That was partly deliberate because we've just been through a very strange scenario. So for 29 years, the lottery was operated solely through 3 licenses by a company called Camelot, who you may well have heard of. In the competition for the 4th license, they were unsuccessful, and a new operator, Allwyn Entertainment Limited, were successful. And as of last Thursday, at 1 minute past midnight, or midnight itself, they became the new operator of the National Lottery. Fortunately for me, my role TUPE'd across, and so I am now the DPO at Allwyn Entertainment Limited, but still ultimately looking after the National Lottery. So yeah, to a bit of background, National Lottery was launched in 1994. A few of us will remember that happening. So approaching its 30th anniversary this year, which is going to be a big deal for all of us working there. Works both in retail and digitally, so we have an online presence, but also you can obviously still play in store. From a data protection perspective, the retail side of it is pretty much hands-off. You know, there isn't really any personal data processed or captured. It's only if you're fortunate enough to win one of the big prizes that you have to provide any personal information. But clearly on the digital side of things, that's a very different proposition, and I'll come to that in a minute. So we have a number of draw-based games, so Lotto, Euro Millions, Set for Life, Thunderball. We have the scratch cards, which I'm sure any of you who've been into a newsagents or kiosk at a supermarket will be very aware of. And then we also have what are called instant win games, which are effectively online scratch cards. Positives, generate over £30 million a week for good causes. As you can see there, nearly 700,000 projects have received funding thus far in the 30 years of the National Lottery. That's an average of 240 in every postcode in the country. And most importantly, I guess for some of us, or for some of you, I'm not allowed to play, 6,800 millionaires have been created thus far, or had been when I created these slides. So it's probably, I think, new line is average of 2 a week. So we'll be rapidly approaching 7,000 for that number, certainly by the end of this year, hopefully. So coming in June 2019, as I did, what was the challenge that I faced? Well, going back to that online play, more than 12 million registered players. So that's a big percentage of the UK population with an online account, and so their personal information held by Camelot. 43,000 retailers. Now, in a lot of cases, those are what we call the supermarket or the multiples, but we also go down to independent retailers. And with an independent retailer, there's a blurring of the line between business information and personal data, because actually, if they may, in some cases, live above the store, certainly they may use a personal email address or a personal phone number as their contact information, and so we're storing that, and so that is therefore considered personal data. Clearly, at the other extreme, if it's info at Tesco's, Manchester.com, that's not personal data, but we have to account for the very many scenarios where it may well be. And of course, we've got our employees, so fairly small, lean organisation, just around 1,000 employees, based primarily out of Watford in Hertfordshire, with a few other locations around the country. So that was kind of the challenge that was faced, and they'd had a GDPR program, but I was the first permanent data protection officer that had been appointed, so there was still quite a lot to do. So, and I think one of the things that is really important, and this has been touched on already, about the importance of knowing your audience, but also engaging well with your audience. So it's getting that buy-in from the business, and I think particularly from the board is really key. So one thing that was really positive was from the outset, data protection and privacy was made a standing agenda item at what's called the board's Assurance, Risk and Security Committee. So every quarter I have to pitch up, I provide a paper that goes into the board pack, and hopefully it gets through with a nod, but on occasion I will be asked questions and I go in and make that appearance. But it means it's got that high level visibility, which is really key. We managed to get data protection training included as part of the mandatory training. So when you join the company, it's one of the sort of modules you have to complete, but then everyone in the company on an annual basis, along with all the other things. And I recognise a point that was made in one of this morning's presentations that they're not always the most popular things, but they do have to at least go through the motions of completing the mandatory training and saying they've read the policies. And one of the things that's linked to this next point is completion of mandatory training is one of the criteria for payment of bonus if a bonus is awarded. So therefore, staff have got a pretty good incentive to complete their mandatory training. Another thing that's linked to that was integrity became one of our metrics for bonus payments. So along with profit targets, sales targets, returns to good causes, i.e. the money we generate for charities, then ensuring that we kept a minimum number of sort of incidents, we stay below a certain threshold, became one of those criteria. So again, that really helps focus the mind of your staff. If you know that, if you get these things wrong, it could jeopardize, payment of an annual bonus. So I said when I started, it was just me, DPO, and I had a project manager, but we were able to establish a new data governance team, so that just gave us some more bodies, team of 3 initially, it's now a team of 4, but it also helped keep that sort of separation. So DPO has this sort of very slightly formal definition that it should be independent and sort of provide an assurance role. It shouldn't necessarily be doing all of the doing as well. So that's been really helpful. So I work very closely with the team, and my view personally is actually the way you get the best assurance is you do it right in the first place. So I don't just sort of sit up in my ivory tower and descend periodically to give them my blessing or to hurl brickbats at them, but just really helpful. And then something that I was very passionate about and an initiative I introduced was we have a network of what we call privacy champions. So within each team, so within the people team, the finance team, marketing, digital, customer services, etc., someone is nominated, hopefully voluntarily, to become privacy champion. And the idea is that they become, they have 2 roles. So they're reactive, so they become the first person within that team that the team will go to if they've got a query about something relating to privacy or data protection. But they're also proactive, so I use them as sort of an extension of my eyes and ears, so that if they see something going on that maybe hasn't been, had that sort of privacy, data protection lens applied to it, that they can flag things to us and we can kind of lean in and get involved. And that's working really well. So what else did we do? So we reviewed policies and processes, and this is sort of linked to the concept of privacy by design. I'm not quite sure why I shouted that. So looked at things like our data protection policy, updated that, make sure it was relevant. We looked at our data retention and archiving policy, because along with all organizations, data retention or over-retention of personal data is a huge issue, and it's one we're still working on. We've got plans, we're not there yet. But one of the things we did was we broke out the schedule of what are the different retention periods for each different types of data and made that a separate entity so that we didn't have to update the whole policy every time we amended the schedule, because we very much consider that a live document, and that responds both to business needs and also potentially changes in sort of the regulatory environment. We introduced the concept of a data ownership policy, because one of the big challenges with something like data retention is getting someone to admit that they own that data so that they are responsible for making the decisions. So we did some work with KPMG and established some principles, and now we have a business data owner for all of the different data types. We refreshed our incident management process. Obviously, under GDPR, there's this requirement to report anything to the ICO within 72 hours of discovery. So really key that the whole organization, the whole business understands the importance of telling you. Even if you don't know all of the details, it doesn't matter. You do your initial notification, and then you follow that up when you know a bit more. And then something else that I drove through. So there's the DPIA concept of a data protection impact assessment, which is something that's formalized within data protection legislation and GDPR. It's something that has to be done in certain situations, so if there's particularly high-risk processing of data. But I've actually taken the view that actually let's just do one every time there's some processing of personal data, because that means there's no risk that something sort of slips under the radar and it's more significant than you realise. And we've built that into what we call our change management process, which is a series of gates that have to be sort of passed before a project can go live. And basically we have at the outset a thing called a front door document, and one of the questions in that is, does this involve processing of personal data? If it's yes, they have to do a DPIA. If they haven't done a DPIA, they can't pass those initial gates and ultimately end up going live. So it's a really good check and just a good way of me getting eyes on what is being proposed, and if necessary, just helping steer the shape and the design of that activity to ensure it remains compliant. Because it's not the job, as with security, it's not the job of privacy and data protection to stop people doing things, it's to allow them to do things in a compliant way. What else did we do? We raised awareness across the whole organisation. So we talked about sort of the high-level stuff and the more formal things around training, making stuff mandatory training. But there are some, the softer power approaches. So we established a presence on the intranet where we could publish just details about the team, but also what else we do. We try and publish regular blogs. So recently we had Data Protection Day, so we used that as an opportunity to sort of talk about it's actually the work we've done on cookie consent management, so the adoption of a reject all button, which is again something that the ICO has pushed quite heavily, and which we managed to persuade the business to preempt. So we actually avoided getting one of being one of the organisations that got a letter from the ICO for not having a reject all button on their cookie consent banner. Those blogs have been on a range of topics, and then one thing that's been really powerful is that we've joined forces with colleagues in InfoSec. So they previously did Cyber Security Awareness Month every September, and we persuaded them that actually it'd be good if we could make that Cyber and Privacy Awareness Month. And we're now going to play a short video which just gives you an example of some of the things we did, not this year, just gone, back in 2022. So.
Recently, a number of our employees have started reporting suspicious activities.
And you are?
Our people and our data need to be protected at all times, and that's why I've called in your team.
Say no more.
Good luck.
I lost the orb.
I think you've got something that belongs to me.
With the charter and orb now officially intact, there's definitely a greater sense of harmony now that privacy and security have been saved.
It was our pleasure.
I want a fiver.
So we actually did a series of four videos which ran one a week over the course of the Cybersecurity and Privacy Awareness Month, and with a sort of a different topic on each one. And so we partnered with a company called Cybermaniacs, who are an American-based company. Actually got one of the puppeteers was the hand underneath. Is it BB-8 in the most recent Star Wars film? So, and we had some slightly dubious amateur actors getting involved as well. But just a good and different and hopefully a fun way of trying to get across some key messages. And so yeah, something that was really good. And what else have we got? Yeah, so where are we now? So most importantly, no complacency. There's still always more to do. I very much see compliance as being a journey. It's not a destination. You don't get to a point and say, yep, that's it, we're GDPR compliant. Always new challenges, new proposals from the business, things they want to do. And that's been brought into really sharp focus with what I was describing, what we've been through. So we've got this new license, so another new 10-year license, new operator. They're Czechoslovakian-owned, European company, operate lotteries across Europe, but this is their first time working in the UK. So sort of working with them is kind of really interesting opportunities, particularly because we have now got colleagues in other countries. But most importantly, a really strong commitment from them as well to protecting personal data and ensuring we only use it in compliant ways. And again, I never want to be complacent, but there are signs that both people within the organisation and the organisation as a whole gets it. So the business does reach out when it wants to do something with personal data. Sometimes unnecessarily so, but I'd always rather people came and checked than sort of you find out 3 months later that someone's gone live and no one had even talked to you. we're getting incidents. People, again, people really proactive and tell me when things have gone wrong, even when it's just a near miss. I've had an email this morning from someone in our contact centre because there's been a confusion. We've got a couple of players, this has happened a couple of times, twins so they live at the same address, they've got very similar names, and when they look up their records, something gets confused and they give out the wrong information. Fortunately, it's only from their twin who, on the whole, they tend to be understanding. I suspect it's not the first time it's happened to them. But, people are telling me about these things, and it's just really, really heartening to see. And as I said, most importantly, privacy, I think, is genuinely seen as an enabler, not a blocker, which is why the business will reach out, because they're not worried that I'm just going to sit there, with my red card and say, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that. They know that we will help them find a way of doing what it is they want and need to do. So, the commercial driver, whilst remaining compliant, which ultimately is the win-win that we're all aiming for. And that's it. So I think I've got time for questions if there are any. Sorry, Sarah, I don't want to steal your... steal your...
You stay there. I'm coming up. You've took me off guard. I know you said you're going to be early. I was like, it's a little bit early. We've got loads of questions. Go on then.
Just interested, the national lottery's been taken over by Czechoslovakia. Now, there's a Brexit question here. How are we dealing with data now travelling between the EU and the UK, and what do you see the future of that is as we start to get to the point where we're going to lose avenues?
So they're the parent company, but they've established a UK entity. So effectively, we have this. From that perspective, nothing's really changed. There's no sharing of data within the group, not of personal data. Clearly, there's some financial data, but there's no sharing of personal data within the group. So just all of the same challenges we would have had before. I mean, in lots of ways, we're very lucky because you can only play the lottery if you're literally based in the UK or Northern Ireland. You can't even, if you're on holiday in Spain and you try and log on to play your online account, if it detects that you're in Spain, you'll be blocked from playing. So from that perspective, we have quite an easy eco-structure when it comes to personal data because it's all UK-based. Clearly, we use suppliers in Europe and further overseas, but we just apply the usual sort of controls in terms of now the new international data transfer agreement if it's outside of the EEA or adequacy. But from a Brexit perspective, there's nothing specific, unique that we're facing because of our new ownership.
You had a question from over here?
I'm a DPO as well, and I can resonate with just about everything you say, but I'd like to understand your perspective on the lastminute.coms that arrive, or the ones that's gone live that you don't know about. How do you actually tackle those to say, you should come to me? You're having to backtrack.
Yeah, and I will be honest, the last few months have been very frantic because we've been in this transition phase, so there was an added complication because Allwyn, the new operators, actually bought Camelot UK last February. So we've been separate legal entities, but under common ownership, but needing to sort of retain that sort of separation, but also successfully transition so that last Thursday there was a smooth transition and that all the people logged in the morning, they could still play their games, people could go to the store and still play the games. So yeah, there has been a lot of that. We were actually having a conversation a couple of days ago within the team that I sit in, and I think there's inevitably had to be some flexibility, but and we've maybe given a bit of slack because of that, the high pressure everyone's been under. But one of the conversations we've been having is absolutely now how do we get that back re-established? And things like baking it into this change management framework. That doesn't preclude the possibility for things that need to be pushed through urgently. But again, because everyone involved in that process, and I used to sit in the legal team, have very close links with this sort of contract from the contractual side. So people will come to me if they see something which they think is being rushed through. So it's there's the sort of the tactical thing, I guess, of how you actually deal with it in the moment, and then there's the strategic thing about just getting the business to better understand how they should do things going forward.
How do you marry agile ways of working?
You've got a microphone there, yeah.
How do you marry up agile ways of working with data and privacy gates?
I mean, I think it's kind of, from my perspective, it's those same things. It's kind of, just, what are we doing? We're sort of having that framework so that, knowing how things should work, ideally, but having the flexibility that when it comes to it, you know, if you get a contract and someone says this needs to be signed by today because we've got to buy this thing, you know, urgently, that, you know, that becomes the focus and the priority. But I don't think there's I think as long as you retain that flexibility, they're not mutually exclusive in my experience and my perspective.
So they're not absolute gates.
I mean, if something's going through the formal gating process, you know, then that's one thing. I mean, you know, if something was an urgent priority, it would almost certainly bypass that gating process because because it needs to. But you know, you know, we try not to, and it's about, again, you know, from that perspective, you know, they are educating the business about this. Is, you know, you need your requirements, then because it's, you know, I'm a very small part of that sign-off process. You know, again, referring to the majority of people in the room, you know, the information security and the testing and all those sorts of things that need to be done consume way more time than my quick data protection impact assessment ever does. So, you know, relatively, I can move quite quickly.
You obviously got the buy-in from the board, and you have got that process in place, which is great. How did you change the actual culture of people on the floor? Because obviously processes are great, but day to day, how did you make people care about it? Because that's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think so. I referred to some of the things there. So I think things like you know, the mandatory training helps, but I think the thing that really focused the mind was knowing that mandatory training is necessary for payment of your bonus. That definitely focuses minds. Knowing that integrity is one of the measures that applies, you know, for a bonus award. You know, so you can hit all your commercial targets, but if we're regularly reporting breaches up to the ICO or to the Gambling Commission, that would undo all of that good commercial work. So I think those things help. Didn't mention it there, but I do have a sort of a regular slot on the induction process. So again, you know, when when newcomers come in, then, you know, get the chance just to talk, and again, just try and impress on people. And, you know, I think the phrase has been used already today, you know, just trying to get people to think in that mindset of, you know, how would you want your data to be being processed, you know, if it was you on the other end, as it were, if you were the data subject or you were the person on at the end of the phone call, you know, what would you want being done with your data? And our contact centre has very strict rules about, you know, what they can and can't do, so that then, you know, they can't write things down. You know, obviously nothing, and, you know, that was a challenge obviously within in lockdown and home working. You know, but, you know, we found ways around that. So I think there is a genuine, there is a good understanding, and particularly with our high tier winners, because the concept of anonymity is actually really, really understood throughout the whole organisation. Because, you know, it's very much a small percentage of winners who take publicity. The vast majority don't. So, you know, that need to protect that information, I think that's understood at quite a high level, and it's just expanding that concept to all the data that they're dealing with.
I'm going to ask a question on that one because I'm dying to ask. So apart from sulking that I'm not one of those 7,000 millionaires, so you just talked on about the having the privacy of those people. What do you see from a threat actor's perspective with regards to how they are targeting or trying to target some of those individuals?
So I'm not aware that so obviously, you know, clearly our networks are under, you know, the same sort of attacks that everyone else is under, and again, particularly in the last couple of months because of the heightened sort of publicity around the change of the operator. We've certainly seen an increased level of activity. I'm not aware that our so our winners' information is held on a completely separate database, which doesn't face the internet, as far as I know, with very locked down privileges. I mean, the vast majority I certainly don't have access to it. The vast majority of our exec don't have access to it. So it's a very small number of people. So the vast majority, and we all go through vetting to quite a high level. So the vast majority of people within the company don't ever know, outside of the ones who take publicity, who any of the winners are. So I think that helps. But yes, I think beyond that, it's just all of the usual controls that most of us would have in place.
Yeah, I get a bit annoyed when it kind of gets the Euro millions and some unnamed person in the UK has won 150 million.
If it's any consolation, I mean, we love it when they do take publicity because it engenders we have this concept of what's called win belief. Because if you look at on social media, there are a lot of people who think that the whole thing's a con and no one ever wins. So actually, when you get someone who is prepared to go on camera and say, yes, I won I think, was it last year or the year before when we had the £180 million winners who took publicity, and that, from our perspective, that's a great outcome.
And then when they turn around and say, but it's not going to change my life, so I'll take it back then. Any other questions for Daniel? Is it we got? Yeah.
You mentioned that the retail part is not really a big concern for you in terms of there's not really a lot to do there. I just wondered whether there was any video monitoring in case of, repudiation when you have people who say they've won but lost a ticket.
Yes, I mean, it's a very good point. We have a security operations team. I mean, all high-tier claims are investigated. The person who claims the prize, they always have to have their name on the ticket, but they have to be able to demonstrate they know where the ticket was bought, what time, etc., and all of those things will be checked. And yes, on occasions we will, if there is any dispute, we will go to the retailer and ask for CCTV footage. But obviously we are dependent upon the retailer providing that to us. So in those cases, as I said, if routinely retail doesn't generate personal data, it is only when we have winners or a small number of disputes about prices which haven't been paid. No, we're certainly not the controller of it at that point, no.
You've got time for a couple more questions. Yeah.
Did you mention that your employees carry out DPIA as well?
Sorry, say that again.
Did you mention that the employees carry out DPIA?
So the goal is that, yes, exactly that. So we've actually been more successful recently. We use OneTrust in L3, so the Camelot. During the transition, we've been just using a Microsoft form, and that's actually proved easier for the business to use. So yes, they do the sort of the first pass on it, and then we review it and obviously go back with questions. I mean, it's the question that always trips the business up, understandably, because I think it's quite a hard thing to explain, is this concept of what's called the lawful basis. So you have to have, all processing of personal data has to satisfy one of six lawful. Okay, fine. So so but. Yeah, absolutely, yes. I mean, the number of I've had a few recently where they've claimed that the lawful basis is vital interest because it's someone needs to be paid a prize, and you have to go back to them and say that's not quite what that means. But why should they know? I mean, they're reading it from a plain English perspective. But yeah, no, I mean, that's the goal: is that the business fills them out, we review them, we then go back with our questions, and there's a sort of a bit of an iterative process. So yeah, but that's been positive that we have got to that stage now. No, I said this is quite new for us. We weren't, and I do think actually simplifying the technology made that slightly easier.
Any more questions for Daniel?
Just basically the new data protection bill and how it's going to impact on data protection officers and transparency.
Yeah. I still think we don't know. I mean, obviously, when it was first announced, so for those of you who don't know, one of the proposals in the new DPDI bill is that the formal requirement for a DPO is removed, but there is still a requirement for a senior responsible owner or individual SRI. Thank you. So, at that point, I did wonder whether I should try and get my job to rebadge, just in case anyone thought that no longer requiring a DPO meant they could sort of get rid of me. It feels instinctively like it's mainly sort of slightly window dressing, which is so you take away, you don't have to have a DPO, but you have to have an SRI. You don't need to do a DPIA, but you have to do an assessment of the risk. So in reality, I'm not sure yet how much changes. I think the big benefit that I think our organisation will see if they do relax the rules on allowing analytics on cookies without consent. I think that would be very popular, particularly having introduced the reject all button, which will almost certainly see a slight reduction in the number of people opting into cookies. So
time for one more, anybody? Forever hold your peace. Go on then.
Nearly got away with it.
How do you ensure that you are keeping culture within your organisation?
How do we measure? I think that's a fair question. I don't think we are yet. So I think it's okay. There we go. All right. But no, yes, it's a good challenge and one we probably should start. I think the danger is you're so focused on kind of getting stuff to a level where you're comfortable that actually then it's like, how do you then maintain it and improve beyond that? So no, thank you.
Daniel, thank you very much. I think
Welcome.
privacy seems to be a hot topic
I know,
today.
yeah, I wasn't
Who'd have
expecting
thought?